Continuing my review of scripting syntax that you'll find useful or you'll need to learn to script in Director 11, we get to the line continuation symbol. This is the backward slash symbol, and in Lingo it indicates that a long line of sample code has been broken into 2 or more lines. Oftentimes you'll see this in textbooks and other printed material where you have limited space in terms of column widths, and they'll have one line of code that will be too long for the printed page. It's also useful to use these to make your script more legible. You can keep your script window more narrow, have more workspace in your Director work if you use these line breaks. JavaScript syntax does not include a line continuation symbol like you do in Lingo. To break multiple lines of JavaScript syntax code, simply add a carriage return, an enter or return, at the end of a line, and then continue the code on the following line. Next we get to semicolons. Semicolons can be used to specify the end of a statement of JavaScript syntax code. Semicolons, however, do not apply to Lingo, and even with JavaScript the use of semicolons is optional. If they're used, they're placed at the end of a complete statement. And perhaps even more confusingly is that even where used, a semicolon does not necessarily specify the end of a line of JavaScript code, and multiple statements can be placed on one line. However, placing separate statements on separate lines is recommended in order to improve readability. Next we reach character spaces. Character spaces within expressions and statements are ignored in both Lingo and JavaScript syntax. So for example, if I add some more spaces between the on and the get behavior script, or the get behavior script description and me here, no effect. So you'll want to add more spaces to increase the readability of your scripts in both Lingo and JavaScript. However, in strings of characters surrounded by quotation marks, spaces are treated as characters. If you want spaces in a string, you must insert them explicitly. For example, in this script, I have a list here. Notice that here I have a lot of spaces in between the items in the list. Here I also have spaces, but in the first example it yields this list with no spaces at all. In this example I am getting a space in between each list item. And the reason for that is that notice that the space is in between the quotation marks in the second example, but in the first example there are no spaces in between the quotation marks, just between the list items, so those spaces are ignored in the result here, whereas the spaces between the quotation marks are included in the string there in the second example. Next we get to case sensitivity. Case sensitivity can vary between Lingo and JavaScript syntax. Whereas in Lingo it's never case sensitive, JavaScript syntax can be case sensitive. For example, in Lingo scripting, each of the following examples here are exactly the same, so you're free to use upper and lower case letters however you want. Although Lingo is not case sensitive, it's still a good idea to choose a case convention and use it consistently throughout your scripts. This way you won't forget whether you're using uppercase letters to begin a statement or not. The lingo that you'll find in most of the books and in all the behaviors has a convention that whenever you have compound words like my sprite member, the first letter of the first word is always lowercase, but the first letter of the second compound word there is capitalized. So in other words, standard is capitalized on the S and M is capitalized on the member to read my standard member. That just makes this easier to read. Now JavaScript syntax is case sensitive when referring to objects, the top level properties or methods that refer to objects, or when referring to user-defined variables. For example, the top level sprite method returns a reference to a specific sprite object and is implemented in Director with all lowercase letters. The first statement in this example here, move this down to the bottom. Let's move this out of the way. And let's bring this down so we can see that. This first line right here refers to the name of the first sprite in a movie, while the second and third statements result in script errors, this one and this one. So you have to be careful with your capitalizations in JavaScript, but you don't need to worry about it in Lingo, although you'll want to come up with a convention and stick to it. And I recommend going with the convention that many Lingo programmers already use, and that is to capitalize the first letter of a compound word, such as my rollover member would have the R capitalized and the M capitalized. There's one exception to this case-sensitive rules, and that is literal strings are always case-sensitive in both Lingo and JavaScript syntax. Now that we've covered all this theory, let me now move on to the next movie and give you a review demonstration of some basic but useful Lingo scripts.